Okay. So, by the way, and again, for those of you who are joining us late, I'm Suzanne. I would be happy to entertain questions throughout the presentation, and depending on how that goes, there may be some time at the end. And I also want to hear just a few comments from you. How many of your organizations, by a show of hands, have some type of mentoring program? Wow, quite a few. I'd say just less than half, maybe. And who does it tend to target? Is it high potentials? Is it minorities, people of color, women? High potentials. Okay, typical, tied to the succession plan. Okay. And I had an interesting question about, well, somebody comes into the organization new and we assign somebody to be their mentor. Well, that's mentoring, right? So there's no one formula for mentoring. And I'm going to hold off this last question because it's really going to have a lot to do with what I talk about when we move from the world of traditional mentoring, which I'm going to talk about briefly, to the world of virtual mentoring. And what is that and why is it so important? So I'm going to move ahead. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the history of mentoring, it goes back a long, long way. Odysseus would go out to fight wars and bring new lands back. And his son needed somebody to watch over him. So he left his trusted advisor and friend, mentor. There's some controversy as to who she is, but let's just leave that alone for now, to guide his son, to be there, to inform him and show him the way. So this concept of mentoring has been around a long, long time. And as you'll see, the nature of mentoring has changed over the years, and it should. Traditionally, when we talk about mentoring, this was like the master-apprentice model. Any of you seen this before? Like in the trades, for example, you have the mason and the mason's apprentice. They're the ones who hold the plaster or hold the cement mix, and they watch the master, and over time they get to do a little bit more. Or you've got the lathe and the person who's working the furniture, right? And these relationships would last a long time. The master, the apprentice. Eventually, the apprentice learned enough to become a master, him or herself, and he or she took on a mentor. And this relationship would last potentially 15, 20 years. And now, one of the things that they get in this relationship is both career support, which I'm going to show you in a minute, is really specific about, well, what would be a good tool for me to learn? What would be a good strategy? What additional education or experience should I get? Or in an organization, somebody who says, Suzanne, take this expat assignment. It'll really be good for your movement towards the GM position, the general manager. That's the kind of advice you get when we talk about career functions. And you also have psychosocial functions, which you'll see in a moment, which are kind of like friendship and a shoulder to lean on. Oh, I had a terrible day today. I made a huge mistake in front of the client. Tell me about it. So the person that gives you that kind of support might not know anything about your chosen field or your career, but they can still be someone to whom you get advice, to whom you complain and think about a terrible day. And one thing that's also not well known or understood, this is a win-win relationship. A lot of people think, well, I don't want to ask somebody to be my mentor. What can I give them? It's not right. It shouldn't be all about me. And the truth is, and I'll show you some research, both parties derive benefits from the relationship. And in organizations that sponsor mentoring programs, the organizations get a lot out of it too. So this is what I said before about the career support and the psychosocial support. I don't need to kind of belabor that slide. We just talked about it. And if you think about your own experiences, either having been a mentor or having been mentored before, do you see things on this list that were helpful to you in that relationship? Okay. So this is not what we're talking about, however, when we talk about mentoring. Oh, good. One giggle. That's good. Thank you. I feel better. You can always count on Dilbert for a great comic in the business world. Okay, so as I said, mentoring used to be the master, the apprentice, long-term relationship, lots to learn from one another. And today, when we look at the world having changed as much as it has, and Stefan did a fantastic job last night of telling us about all of these changes from an economic perspective, what we're seeing is mentoring of all flavors, all shapes, all sizes. We see mentoring by peers as well as superiors. Anybody here start to use the iPhone or BlackBerry and find themselves a little overwhelmed at first? Or is that just me? Okay. My 16-year-old twins taught me how to use my iPhone, and they still teach me, oh, there's a great app, you should learn this. Here, Mom, this is how you put the app on. Oh, okay, thanks. Does this sound familiar? Okay. So it's not just about the master and the apprentice, but we really can learn from one another in different venues, learning how to use new technologies, et cetera. We also think about the organization. In most organizations, we think of mentors at the top. And most organizations look something like this. So we have a demand and supply problem, don't we? We have fewer at the top, we have more at the bottom, and how do you accomplish the kind of development that is needed at the bottom or at the high potential level? Sometimes you have to group up, right? So you have one mentor talking with a group of like-minded individuals. It's still mentoring, right? And it makes sense because it takes care of the supply and demand problem. We also have face-to-face mentoring combined with virtual mentoring, what I know you came here to hear about today. Listen, how many of you are on the internet? It would have been a more interesting question if I asked how many of you are not, right? So as long as we have access, and as long as there are people from whom we can learn across the globe, why wouldn't we? Even education has changed. How many of you have taken an online course before? Okay. Fantastic. If I asked that question 15 years ago, I think the answer would have been 0. So the way in which mentoring is accomplished today reflects the changes in the world, economically, socially, technologically, et cetera. And the last thing I want to mention is even though one mentor is better than no mentors, and we know this from the research, more is better than fewer. Why? Well, look at the world today, right? This is nothing that you don't already know. The career is boundaryless. Who's, by the way, responsible for your career?
Myself.
You are. How about you? You, right? It used to be, you started with this big firm. They kind of took you under their wing and they said, Matthew, we're going to show you the way from beginning to end. We'll plan your career. We'll make sure you get all that training you need. You'll get those assignments, and eventually you'll get to the top of, well, where you should get. And now we're responsible for our careers. What about the loyalty? Organizations loyal to employees? Are you loyal to your organizations? Okay, I'm not looking. Okay? So the world is changing. We're responsible for our own mentoring, our own career development, and so therefore we have to look at all the different mechanisms that are available to us to get that kind of support. And here's another question for you. How many of you in your day-to-day work manage people you don't see? And keep your hands up. How many of you learn specifically how to accomplish that task in your formal education? Yeah. Okay? So even if you're very smart, and I know, I'm looking at the room right now, I know you're all very smart. It's just not possible that any one person can have all the information they need within them now and in the future. And even if you have one mentor, one very smart mentor, combined with your knowledge is still not enough. So one of the things I want you to leave with this morning is the idea that more mentors is not only a luxury, it's a necessity. As life gets more and more complicated in the workplace, outside the workplace, between the two, and thinking about, well, how do I plan for, now I have children, how do I plan, now I have to get them in college, how do I plan, I'm going to go into retirement. All these different phases require help and advice from other people. So having one mentor is just not enough. And so we're going to talk about how we kind of try to respond to all of these challenges using mentors. So There's been about 35 years worth of empirical research. And I promise you, I won't tell you about all 35 years worth of research. This is just a summary list of what we know. People who are mentored, as opposed to people who are not, will tend to rise faster in their career, make more money, and even be more satisfied. Now, the first two are easy to measure, right? You can look at someone's progression, you could look at the amount of money they've amassed over their career. But why do you think people who have mentors find themselves more satisfied in their careers than those who don't?
They have like a secure base where they can talk to.
Exactly. For example, I've had students come up to me and say, you know, I've been in sales for 10 years and I'm quite good. I'm making good money, I drive a nice car, I live in the right neighborhood. I don't like what I do. I feel like I'm manipulating people. I'm not saying that all salespeople feel this way. This was just one conversation I had. And so we talked and I asked him some questions. And he reflected. And this is what you get from a mentor, or even, forget the word mentor, a colleague or a trusted friend, where you can ask these questions and suddenly you get to start thinking about, you know, what is important to me? What makes me happy? And so it's not all about more money and more responsibility. Sometimes it's just an opportunity to reflect, someone who asks you good questions. So as you can see, some of these skills are what we call hard skills or quantifiable, and some are a little bit harder to quantify, but nonetheless important. I said that mentors benefit as well, and we know from the research this. Think about it. If I asked you, Ole,
Yeah.
to be my mentor, how does that feel? Ole, you've accomplished a lot in your career, and I'm wondering if from time to time I could call on you and ask you some questions.
Okay, it feels good. It's an honor.
It's an honor. I'm sorry, he doesn't have the microphone yet, and we'll have the microphone runners in a moment. But it's an honor. Very few people will say, no, I don't want to be your mentor. I mean, think about it. It's like I've arrived, right? I have something that people want. So very few people will say, no, thank you. We'll just keep you close by. Thank you. Okay? So first of all, when the mentor feels good about it, the mentor is transferring knowledge, sharing experiences. This is something that's great for the company as well as him or herself. And sometimes it's also a chance to kind of think back on their career. You know, now that you asked me about my role as country manager, I'm thinking there's more that I want to do. I haven't done enough. So this idea of revitalization. Think also about, you know, if you take the top 5% of people across all organizations, the diversity is not super. It's not great, right? So when they're involved in these intercultural, intergender relationships, they also learn, you know, I never really experienced the Indian culture before, or I never really experienced the Chinese culture before. So there are a lot of things that they can learn from one another. And then there's the example, as I said, about the technology. Sometimes you have the wiser person sharing with you their experiences as a country manager or a director of finance, and you have the person who is younger sharing, well, let me show you how you can set up your whole sound system in your house, for example. The organization, again, this makes a lot of sense. How many of you, when you first started your company, received the employee manual? You know, that big book that tells you everything you need to know about your company? And how many of you read it cover to cover? Yeah. It's working, right? Okay, so, I mean, you know, think about it. You have an organizational chart, right? And then there's the way things really work. And you don't learn that from the employee manual. You don't learn that from the organizational chart. But when you start talking to the people in your organization, you learn, this is how things really work. You know, don't avoid this particular secretary. She's the one who has access to all the other secretaries. Make sure you talk to her. So managing the white spaces in between the organizational chart. So it's really important for the onboarding process, for the socializing process. And also when you think about your companies being dispersed all over the world, I find that when we have programs here, custom partnership programs, you have people from Argentina and Brazil and the Netherlands and Greece, and they're, oh, I never realized that we had an organization down in Brazil. That's great. And people start networking and talking to one another and learning all that their companies offer all over the world. So why not make those relationships a little bit more formal or a little bit more real and have people work together across companies, across lines, across business units, etc. So you have a chance by having these connections occurring through the company to not only make people happier because of the potential for more mentoring, but also to be more competitive. Let me ask this question. If you found out that in starting with a new company that they had a really strong mentoring program targeted at certain individuals, high potentials, etc., would that make you interested in joining them? Yeah, I'm being taken care of. My company cares about me. Right? So it can even be a tool for recruitment. And we see that. Some of the top firms have very strong mentoring programs. So again, I know you're here to talk about virtual mentoring, but I just wanted to make sure that we're on the same page about mentoring in general, since virtual mentoring is a kind of a new form. So here we are. We're entering the world of virtual mentoring. And by the way, let me be clear about two things. First of all, the world of virtuality has changed. It used to be, I'll send you an email and you send it back to me. And now we have lots of options that are virtual, right? We could chat real time. We could pick up the phone. We could video conference or Skype. Okay? So when I say virtual, realize that there is quite a range of what's available to us. Anything that's not face-to-face is virtual. But the richness, the possibilities do vary. And the second thing I want to say is, and just keep in mind, when I'm talking about e-mentoring, virtual mentoring, I'm not at all saying get rid of your face-to-face mentors. Don't talk to them ever again. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, and I hope you conclude by the time we finished this morning, that this is viable. It is tenable. It is something that even within your current network of people who are there for you to help you develop your career, this is an option to expand your network. This is an option to maybe Ole and I have been meeting face-to-face for years, and then one of us gets transferred to a different country. We can still maintain that relationship. Or another way, it can be virtual to start because we've never worked face-to-face before, we're in a different country, and then we get opportunities to meet, and that only richens and deepens the relationship. So I just want to make sure when I'm talking about this, you don't think I'm saying, okay, it's a new age, get rid of all those face-to-face mentors and replace them with virtual ones, okay?